The gavel struck like a thunderclap, and the courtroom air trembled with finality. The narrator's voice carried the weight of disbelief as Thomas Hayes, the wrongly accused, clutched the table with pale knuckles, whispering, "This cannot be happening." Across the aisle, the velvet blade prosecutor Eleanor Grant smiled faintly, her eyes cold and detached. Detective Daniel Cross, seated in the gallery, felt a knife twist in his chest as he realized justice had just been stolen in plain sight. A storm rumbled beyond the courthouse walls, rain pelting against the stained windows as if the heavens themselves objected. A phone buzzed in Daniel's pocket, unseen by others, and when he glanced at the screen, his breath caught. An anonymous message read, "You missed the truth." The echo of the verdict mingled with the rain, and a chilling certainty spread. This case was not over, not by a long shot. The narrator described the courthouse steps slick with rain as Thomas stumbled into the night, his tie askew, eyes hollowed by despair. Reporters swarmed, flashing cameras igniting the storm's gloom, each question stabbing deeper. "Mr. Hayes, did you kill her?" one shouted, and he recoiled as though struck. Detective Daniel Cross lingered near the marble pillars, watching the broken man descend into chaos, guilt gnawing at his conscience. He muttered, "They'll bury the truth unless I dig it out." The storm surged, and thunder roared like a judge unseen, warning of consequences yet to come. Eleanor Grant emerged gracefully behind him, umbrella raised, her smile practiced for the crowd. Daniel's jaw tightened as he watched her vanish into the black car waiting at the curb. The battle lines were drawn, and justice already felt like a fleeting dream slipping further into shadow. The narrator carried the scene into a cramped diner glowing under flickering neon, where Daniel nursed a black coffee he never intended to drink. The storm still raged outside, raindrops racing down glass like tears unshed. A teenage girl slid into the booth across from him, her hood dripping, eyes sharp with defiance. "You don't know the half of it," she said, voice cutting the silence. This was Lily Carter, the reluctant fire starter, carrying knowledge too dangerous for her age. Daniel studied her, suspicion and curiosity warring. She smirked, sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin, her pen scratching secrets onto paper. The narrator whispered that fate had just shifted, though neither fully understood it yet. Outside, a lightning flash revealed Thomas wandering aimlessly across the street, the storm swallowing him whole. The narrator turned somber as Daniel's phone buzzed again, the same cryptic sender taunting him. "Pieces are missing. Follow the thread." He muttered, "Damn it, who are you?" while Lily leaned closer, curiosity sparking. "Maybe someone who knows what you don't," she teased, her tone both mocking and urgent. The hum of the diner's jukebox failed to soften the tension as Daniel weighed whether to trust this reckless girl. His instincts screamed danger, yet something in her eyes mirrored truths he had long buried. Across the counter, the warm comforter, Grace Miller, poured coffee with steady hands, watching them with a smile too soft, too knowing. The narrator hinted that bonds were forming in shadows where betrayal was inevitable, each gesture charged with consequence. Outside, the storm seemed endless, its rhythm syncing with the pulse of the unraveling case. The narrator's voice deepened as the storm lulled for a brief, deceptive moment. Grace approached their booth, setting down steaming mugs with a gentle smile that masked her own calculations. "You two look like you've seen ghosts," she said softly, her touch lingering on the table. Daniel glanced at her, torn between gratitude and unease, and muttered, "More like demons in disguise." Lily laughed, short and sharp, sketching darker lines onto her napkin as though to seal his words. Grace's eyes softened, but behind them hid the weight of compromises made long ago. The narrator foreshadowed that comfort often came with hidden costs. Outside, sirens wailed through the storm, distant yet urgent, a reminder that the city was unraveling alongside their fates. The storm gathered its strength again, preparing for another strike as the night dragged them deeper into its secrets. The narrator described Daniel Cross, staring out the diner window, as dawn cracked faintly through the storm, exhaustion painting shadows under his eyes. Lily Carter stretched lazily in the booth, her sarcasm cutting through the silence, You think justice cares about your sleep? He sighed, rubbing his temples, muttering, "Justice doesn't care about anything anymore." Grace Miller moved quietly behind the counter, pouring coffee with her calm presence, the only warmth in the otherwise tense room. Outside, sirens wailed again, mingling with thunder, and the city seemed restless, unable to settle. Daniel's phone buzzed with another message. Look deeper at the past. He clenched his jaw, the narrator explaining his reluctance to open doors he had long locked. Lily grinned, sensing his hesitation, and whispered, "Maybe that's why they chose you." The morning promised no peace, only heavier burdens. The narrator's tone shifted as Daniel rose abruptly, tossing bills on the counter, his decision made, though the weight of it nearly crushed him. Lily followed with a defiant spark, her voice sharp, "You'll need me whether you like it or not." Daniel turned, his eyes narrowing as he warned, "This isn't a game. People die in this." She only shrugged, gripping her sketchbook like a weapon, her bravado covering the fragility underneath. Grace intercepted gently, setting a hand on Lily's shoulder, her voice soothing. "You shouldn't push too far." Yet her eyes flickered with something unreadable, a quiet possession of knowledge best left buried. The narrator explained how trust is born in fragile moments, but betrayal often grows in the same soil. Daniel stormed into the morning drizzle, his trench coat flaring behind him as if the storm had chosen its soldier. The narrator guided the story into the precinct, where Daniel entered with rain still dripping from his coat. Officers glanced up briefly, whispers trailing behind him like shadows. He ignored them, heading straight for the evidence room, his determination masking unease. Lily slipped in behind, her sharp eyes taking in every corner with restless curiosity. "They don't trust you, do they?" she muttered, amusement lacing her tone. Daniel shot her a look, replying through clenched teeth, "Trust has nothing to do with truth." Inside the evidence room, shelves loomed heavy with forgotten files, dust clinging to the weight of unsolved crimes. Daniel pulled a familiar box, its label faded, his hand trembling slightly. The narrator whispered that opening old wounds never healed them, but sometimes it revealed scars that others tried to hide. Lily smirked. "Looks like treasure to me." The narrator described Daniel opening the box, papers spilling with photographs, transcripts, and fragments of lives broken. His hands shook as he lifted one photo, a smiling face frozen in time, the lingering memory of someone long gone. Lily leaned closer, whispering with unnerving certainty, "She's the key, isn't she?" Daniel swallowed hard, the ache in his chest too familiar. "Don't say her name," he muttered, his voice rough with buried grief. Lily tilted her head, studying him, then asked softly, "If you won't, who will?" The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with history refusing to stay hidden. The narrator emphasized how the past presses forward like water against a dam, threatening to drown everything when cracks form. Daniel shoved the photo back, slamming the box shut, as though silence itself could rewrite the truth. The narrator shifted to the hallway outside, where Daniel pressed his palms against the cold tile wall, his breath uneven as the storm outside returned in muffled echoes. Lily lingered behind him, her defiance softened, and she said quietly, "You can't run from her forever." Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice sharp, "I'm not running. I'm fighting." Grace appeared at the far end, her presence unexpected, carrying coffee as though the world hadn't just shattered in front of him. Her smile was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition when they met his. The narrator explained that some wounds are invisible, stitched not by time, but by secrets carried in silence. Daniel stepped forward, shoulders squared, determination hardening. Grace set the coffee cup on a ledge, her calm voice floating. "Then be sure you know who you're fighting for." The hallway seemed longer, darker, filled with echoes of choices not yet made. The narrator described the precinct war room glowing with maps, photographs, and red strings that connected fragments of chaos into a tangled web. Daniel Cross stood rigid, eyes darting between clues as though trying to piece together a ghost. Lily Carter leaned against the wall, her voice sharp, "You're chasing shadows, detective." He shot her a look replying, "Shadows have sources, and I'll find the one casting them." Grace Miller entered quietly, her presence soft but unsettling, offering files she claimed to have just found. Daniel's eyes narrowed as the narrator explained suspicion threaded through every gesture. Outside, the storm quieted, but its absence felt ominous, like silence before a scream. Lily flipped through the files, smirking. "This stinks of setup." Daniel's hand clenched into a fist, determination hardening. The rising conflict was no longer abstract. It lived in the room with them. The narrator carried the tension into the dim parking garage, where Daniel confronted Grace, the echoes of their footsteps bouncing against concrete pillars. "Where did you really get those files?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Grace's eyes met his, steady and unreadable, as she replied, "From someone who wants the truth found." Lily, trailing behind, muttered, "Or someone who wants us buried." The garage lights flickered, casting long shadows that stretched like claws. A black sedan idled in the corner, tinted windows hiding unseen eyes. Daniel instinctively reached for his holster, his instincts screaming danger. The narrator revealed how paranoia had become survival in a city poisoned by corruption. Grace stepped forward, her hand raised in reassurance, yet the flicker in her gaze betrayed more than words would. The storm may have calmed above, but war brewed below. The narrator shifted to a deserted street where rain pooled in potholes under flickering neon. Daniel's phone buzzed, another cryptic message flashing. "Check the ledger, truth lies in numbers," he muttered. Always riddles, frustration lacing his tone. Lily darted ahead, spotting a discarded briefcase half buried in trash. "This it?" she asked, her grin sharp, daring. Daniel opened it cautiously, papers spilling with coded transactions and names of powerful men. His breath hitched as he whispered, "They're deeper in this than I thought." Lily smirked. "Told you, it's treasure." Suddenly headlights flared at the far end, an engine revving like a predator preparing to strike. The narrator explained how evidence was a curse as much as salvation, each truth discovered marking them for destruction. Daniel stuffed the papers into his coat, urgency snapping his movements. The chase was no longer waiting, it had arrived. The narrator painted chaos as the car sped toward them, tires screeching across wet asphalt. Daniel yanked Lily to the side, shouting, "Move!" Papers scattered into the storm, evidence fluttering like broken wings. Grace appeared suddenly from the alley, pulling Daniel upright, her voice firm. "Go! Now!" He hesitated, suspicion and desperation colliding in his chest. Lily shouted. She knew this was coming, her accusation slicing through the rain. The sedan swerved, a figure inside silhouetted but concealed, the predator unseen. Daniel grabbed what files he could, his voice strained. "We can't lose this trail." The narrator emphasized how trust fractured further with each second, allies blurring with enemies under the storm's relentless gaze. The city itself seemed to conspire, its alleys dark mouths swallowing secrets. The pursuit had begun, and survival now depended on instinct alone. The narrator slowed the pace as Daniel, Lily, and Grace hid in the shell of an abandoned warehouse, their breaths harsh in the silence. Rain dripped through broken windows, each drop echoing like a clock, counting down. Lily paced, restless, snapping, "We're running blind." Daniel slammed the briefcase onto a crate, his voice gravel, "Better blind than dead." Grace steadied herself, brushing damp hair back, whispering, "They'll come again." Her calm tone unnerved Daniel, the narrator noting how serenity and chaos often signaled dangerous certainty. Lily glared at her, suspicion tightening. "You knew too much." Grace smiled faintly, her eyes unreadable, and replied, "Knowing is survival." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, torn between mistrust and necessity. The warehouse groaned under the storm's weight, the city outside unyielding. Conflict had risen, and escape felt impossible. The narrator described the warehouse in silence, the storm outside now reduced to steady rain, dripping like a metronome of dread. Daniel cross-pored over the ledger, each page revealing names tied to crimes hidden under polished smiles. His voice was low, strained. "They're not just involved. They own the system." Lily Carter paced restlessly, her eyes flashing. You mean they own us? Grace Miller leaned against a pillar, her calm smile unsettling as she said, Power always leaves fingerprints, but sometimes you're meant to find them. Daniel glanced up sharply, suspicion slicing through him. The narrator whispered how truth once uncovered can never be unseen, and Daniel realized the fight was bigger than survival. It was war against a machine. Lily grabbed a page, smirking. This one? He's untouchable. Daniel replied, voice heavy. Then he'll fall the hardest. The balance of the game had shifted. The narrator shifted the scene to a quiet alley where the storm's aftermath left puddles glowing with neon reflections. Daniel met a shadowed figure who handed him a worn envelope, muttering, She's not who you think. Before Daniel could ask, the man vanished into darkness. Lily peeked over his shoulder as he opened the envelope, photographs spilling of Eleanor Grant with men tied to the ledger. Daniel's breath caught. She's deeper in this than anyone. Lily smirked. Your velvet blade just turned on you. Grace, standing behind, tensed ever so slightly, her voice soft. Sometimes enemies are the only truth tellers. The narrator explained that betrayal is never clean. It stains everything it touches. Daniel clenched the photos, his anger boiling. Above them, thunder returned faintly, as though the storm refused to leave without justice. The truth had finally begun to fracture masks. The narrator carried the tension into a candlelit church, abandoned and echoing with memories of prayers long silenced. Daniel laid the photographs on the altar, his voice heavy. This is where it began. Lily wandered through the pews, whispering, Feels more like where it ends. Grace lit a candle, her face bathed in soft glow, saying, Truth seeks sacred places, it cannot survive in shadows forever. Daniel studied the stained glass windows fractured by time, realizing they mirrored his fractured faith. The narrator revealed that buried beneath the case was a personal wound, the lingering memory of his sister, her disappearance now entwined with Eleanor's shadow. Daniel whispered her name, breaking silence he had guarded for years. Lily paused, her sharp eyes softening with recognition. She was taken, wasn't she? His silence was answer enough. The storm outside swelled, bells tolling without hands. The narrator described Daniel confronting Grace outside the church, rain misting under lamplight. His voice cut sharp. You knew about her all along. Grace's calm cracked for the first time, her eyes glistening. I knew enough to survive. Lily stood between them, torn, whispering, You're both liars in different ways. The silence deepened, heavy with things unsaid. Grace's voice steadied again. Eleanor doesn't just control the courts, she controls memories. She rewrites what people believe. Daniel's fists clenched as the narrator explained the horror. Truth was not merely hidden, but erased. Lily gasped. Then how do we fight someone who owns the past? Daniel's jaw set, his reply cold, by making sure the present burns brighter. The mist thickened, wrapping them in ghostly light. What was once suspicion now erupted into certainty. Betrayal was closer than blood. The narrator brought the act to climax in a high-rise office bathed in glass and steel. Eleanor Grant seated like a queen at her throne of law. Daniel slammed the ledger onto her polished desk, his voice thunder. It ends here. Eleanor's lips curved into a calm smile, her reply a dagger. It only ends when I allow it. Lily burst forward, defiant. People like you always fall. Eleanor's eyes fixed on her, unshaken. Children should be seen, not heard. Grace stood frozen, torn between loyalties, as the narrator whispered how truth divides even the strongest bonds. The storm outside lit the skyline in jagged flashes, reflecting in Eleanor's unblinking eyes. Daniel's rage burned, but beneath it was fear, the recognition that she had been pulling strings long before this night. The walls of power began to tremble as revelation loomed like lightning about to strike. The narrator described the courtroom packed with press, whispers rippling like a current under fluorescent lights. Daniel Cross stood at the front, his voice raw. This is the truth they tried to bury. He raised the ledger high, pages fluttering as though fighting to escape. Eleanor Grant sat composed, her sharp gaze unwavering. whispering coldly to her aide, "It will never hold." Lily Carter, seated beside Daniel, scribbled furiously, documenting every moment with a defiance far greater than her years. Grace Miller lingered behind them, her face unreadable, torn between salvation and betrayal. The judge's gavel hovered in silence as if suspended in time. The narrator explained that truth had finally reached the surface, but survival now depended on whether anyone dared to acknowledge it. Outside, thunder shook the windows, the storm returning for its final witness. The narrator shifted to Eleanor, rising with measured grace, her voice cutting sharp across the room. "Lies dressed as truth are still lies." Daniel shot back, his tone searing. "Then why do your fingerprints stain every page?" Gasps rippled through the crowd, tension thickening. Lily smirked, whispering, "Nailed her," as her pen scratched across paper. Grace's hands trembled, her eyes darting between them, as though waiting for her own secrets to surface. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order, but control had slipped already. The narrator explained how the balance of power teetered on the edge, every word threatening to collapse everything. Eleanor smiled faintly, her composure like armor, and said, "You think this will end me? It only proves how little you know." Outside, lightning cracked, illuminating faces filled with fear and fury alike. The narrator described chaos as a hidden witness was called. A frail man stepping forward under the eyes of the world. His voice cracked. "She paid me to bury the evidence." Eleanor's composure faltered, her jaw tightening though her smile remained. Daniel leaned forward, his tone fierce. "Say her name." The man trembled but whispered, "Eleanor Grant." Gasps filled the courtroom, the sound swelling like thunder itself. Lily clutched her notebook tighter, her grin widening in triumph. Grace lowered her gaze, the narrator revealing how guilt is sometimes heavier than crime. Eleanor's eyes burned with fury, but she sat motionless, a storm contained in flesh. The judge's gavel fell again and again, each strike echoing like a drumbeat of reckoning. The narrator declared the climax had reached its breaking point, truth could no longer be restrained. The narrator carried the tension higher as Eleanor suddenly rose, her voice thunderous. "Do you fools think justice belongs to you?" She strode toward the bench, her heels striking like hammers. Daniel moved to block her, shouting, "This ends now." Lily gasped, her pen frozen mid-word. Grace stood abruptly, her voice breaking, "Stop, this isn't the way." The courtroom erupted into chaos, voices clashing, reporters surging forward with cameras flashing like lightning. The narrator explained how order collapsed under the weight of truth, and survival meant choosing sides before the storm consumed them all. Eleanor's eyes locked with Daniel's, the silent war between them reaching its fiery peak. The gavel's strikes were drowned by the storm itself, thunder shaking the building as if justice had entered to reclaim its throne. The narrator described silence falling like a blade as security rushed in, holding Eleanor at bay. Her voice hissed through clenched teeth. "You think you've won? The system bends for me." Daniel stepped forward, his tone calm but deadly. "Not today." The ledger lay open on the table, its pages lit by a sudden flash of lightning. Lily's hand pressed over it protectively, whispering, "It's ours now." Grace turned her face away, tears glistening though she smiled faintly, her betrayal and loyalty colliding in one fractured moment. The judge leaned forward, his gavel striking with finality. Order will be restored. The narrator explained that this moment was not just the end of a trial, but the breaking of an empire's shield. Outside, the storm reached its climax, roaring approval as if the city itself demanded justice at last. The narrator described the courthouse steps under a gray morning sky. The storm finally broken, leaving puddles that reflected weary faces. Daniel Cross descended slowly, shoulders heavy but unbowed, his voice low. "The truth finally breathes." Lily Carter followed close behind, clutching her notebook to her chest, muttering, "We made them listen." Grace Miller lingered at the top of the steps, her coat wrapped tight, whispering to no one. But at what cost? Reporters pressed forward, microphones outstretched, questions flying like arrows. Daniel ignored them, his eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing the system was only wounded, not destroyed. The narrator explained how victory rarely felt clean, instead carrying scars of battles fought in shadows. Lily tugged Daniel's sleeve, urging, "Don't stop now." He glanced at her, a faint smile breaking through, proof that even in ruin, resolve remained. The narrator carried the story into a diner once more. Now quieter, the neon buzz gentler against the morning calm. Daniel sat in the booth, staring at a steaming cup of coffee, his hands motionless around it. Lily slid in across from him, smirking lightly. "Guess you'll finally drink one." He chuckled faintly, shaking his head. "Don't count on it." Grace approached carefully, setting down plates without a word, her silence speaking louder than comfort. The air was different now, filled not with urgency but with heavy reflection. The narrator explained how endings often resembled beginnings, though every face carried new weight. Lily leaned forward, her tone serious for once. "We can't stop here." Daniel looked at her, his eyes tired but unwavering. "No, we can't." Outside, sunlight broke through clouds, fragile but real. The narrator shifted to a cemetery, bathed in late afternoon light, quiet except for birds stirring in bare trees. Daniel stood at a modest grave, his hand brushing across the stone, whispering, "I kept my promise." Lily lingered at a respectful distance, her sketchbook closed for once, her face uncharacteristically solemn. Grace stood beside her, eyes lowered, hands clasped in front, her silence heavy with things unspoken. The narrator explained how justice can heal wounds but never erase them, leaving scars carved in stone. Daniel's eyes glistened as he added softly, "But it's never enough." Lily stepped closer, whispering, "She'd be proud you didn't stop." Grace finally looked up, her expression unreadable, her voice faint. "The dead never leave us." The sun broke briefly through the clouds, casting light across the headstone as if affirming his word. The narrator described a press conference in the city hall, flashes popping as Daniel stood before cameras, the ledger now in evidence bags at his side. His voice carried steady. "This case proves justice is fragile, but not gone." Lily stood beside him, her chin raised proudly, her youth a reminder of resilience. Grace remained in the background, her presence silent yet undeniable, her expression unreadable to the crowd. Reporters shouted questions, their voices colliding, desperate for clarity. The narrator explained how public victory often hides private loss, and though the city cheered, Daniel knew the system still pulsed with corruption. Lily's voice cut through, surprising all. "We won't let them erase the truth again." The crowd erupted with applause. Daniel glanced at her, pride mixing with sorrow, the torch already passing to her hands. The narrator closed the act with Daniel alone in his apartment, the city skyline glowing beyond rain-washed windows. He sat at a desk, the ledger now locked away, a cigarette burning in an ashtray beside untouched coffee. His voice low, almost prayerful. "Justice isn't a victory. It's a fight that never ends." The narrator explained how triumph carried no comfort, only the burden of vigilance. On the wall hung a faded photo of his sister, the lingering memory, her smile frozen in time. Daniel touched the frame gently, whispering, "I didn't forget." Outside, the city pulsed with life, indifferent to his struggle. The storm was gone, but its echo lingered. The narrator left the audience with the truth. Resolution never erases the shadows. It only reminds us they are still watching. The narrator described Daniel Cross walking through the city at dusk, the streets glistening from fresh rain. He moved deliberately, trench coat swaying, eyes scanning the skyline as if searching for ghosts. Lily Carter walked a few steps behind, her notebook tucked under her arm, muttering, "We shook them, but they'll come back." Daniel's voice was steady. "Then we'll be ready." Grace Miller followed quietly, her gaze distant, whispering, "Some fights never end." The narrator explained how the city seemed calmer, yet shadows still lingered in alleys where truth rarely reached. Streetlights flickered on, their glow soft but uncertain, mirroring their fragile victory. Lily glanced up at Daniel, her voice sharp but hopeful. "You're not quitting, are you?" He shook his head faintly. "Not while the lies still breathed." The city was alive, but so were its secrets. The narrator carried the story to a rooftop overlooking the skyline, storm clouds slowly parting to reveal faint stars. Daniel leaned against the ledge, cigarette glowing faintly as he muttered, "Justice is never permanent." Lily sat cross-legged nearby, sketching quickly, replying, "But it's still worth chasing." Grace stood in the background, her coat catching the wind, her eyes fixed on the streets below, as if weighing every secret she still carried. The narrator explained that victories are fragile threads woven through time, and even the strongest unravel when neglected. Daniel dropped ash to the wind, his voice gravel. "We lit a fire tonight. Let's hope it burns longer than we do." Lily smirked. "That's why I keep drawing it." Grace finally spoke softly. "Fires consume. Be careful what they destroy." Silence settled, heavier than the skyline. The narrator turned inward, describing Daniel alone later that night in his apartment. The ledger lay locked away on a shelf, but the weight of it pressed against him still. He stared at a faded photograph of his sister, whispering, "I didn't save you, but I fought for her." Lily's voice echoed in his memory, "We can't stop here." Grace's warning lingered too, a reminder that the cost of truth was never paid in full. The city lights flickered outside his window, endless and indifferent. The narrator explained that justice was never final. It was borrowed, held only as long as someone dared to protect it. Daniel exhaled, smoke curling through the dim light, and whispered into the silence, "I'll keep fighting." The storm might be gone, but its echoes refused to fade. The narrator described Lily at her own small room, papers scattered, sketches covering walls like fragments of truth stitched together. She scribbled furiously, her voice muttering to herself, "If they erase it, I'll draw it again." Her defiance was relentless, a fire no storm could quench. Grace's words echoed in her memory, warnings of fires consuming what they touch. Yet Lily's smirk grew sharper, her eyes alive with conviction. The narrator explained that the young rarely fear scars, they carve them into their own stories. Outside her window, police sirens wailed faintly, reminders that corruption still stalked the streets. She pinned a new sketch of Eleanor Grant to the wall, her expression fierce, whispering, "You won't disappear." The city was bigger than her, but she was louder than silence. For the first time, she felt chosen. The narrator closed with Eleanor Grant alone in a prison cell, the storm silenced, the night around her unnervingly still. She sat perfectly upright, her black suit replaced by plain gray fabric, her eyes burning with the same unwavering composure. Her whisper was chilling. "You think the truth won, but truth is fragile. It bends, it breaks." The narrator explained that her voice echoed in corridors meant to silence her, but power finds ways to linger. Daniel's fight had ended for now, Lily's fire had been lit, but Eleanor's shadow promised the war was not finished. A single light flickered above, buzzing like a dying storm, and she raised her head with a faint smile. "They'll forget," she murmured. The narrator left the audience with the haunting truth. Justice may win battles, but corruption waits patiently for its return.